Eide is the UN Special Representative for Afghanistan. He joins us now from our studio in Kabul. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us, sir. You said on Tuesday, while flanked by John Kerry and Hamid Karzai, let me quote you, "When we stand here today, I think we can safely say that those institutions that have been the key institutions in this period, they have functioned the way they should." How can you possibly say that, sir, when 2 months later it transpires that the Independent Election Commission got it wrong in saying that the election was free and fair? It got it wrong by a long way. 1/3 of Hamid Karzai's votes had to be thrown out.
But this is exactly the key of it. There's no doubt that there was widespread fraud, but the Complaint Commission addressed that issue and came to the result it did, which has now led us to a second round. That's why I said the constitutional process and the institutions put in place, they worked the way they should, and that's reassuring. It's been very complicated, but the institutions were solid enough to handle the problem.
Are you saying that the IEC's credibility is not in question at all, that you trust it completely to conduct free, fair and credible elections in this runoff in just over 2 weeks' time?
I said that we will have a credible and as inclusive election as possible. Now, with regard to the IEC, the EEC and all the other institutions involved, we have to look very carefully at the lessons learned from this. But I believe that we will be able to conduct elections on the 7th of November, and all the preparations are in full swing.
So it's not only the IEC's credibility that has come under scrutiny. What about the UN's credibility as well, your own credibility? You dismissed the man at the UN who was telling us of fraud long before everybody else. You fired Peter Galbraith because he said there was fraud and that you and the UN were covering up the voter fraud and throwing your weight and your support behind Hamid Karzai.
I'm sorry to correct you. I did not fire Peter Galbraith. The Secretary General of the United Nations fired him. That's a completely different story. I consider Peter Galbraith a footnote in the history of these elections. And I'm impressed to see, and I've never seen before, somebody become such an expert on Afghanistan in 7 weeks. That is impressive. But I believe that we've been able to handle the process well, and I do believe that the UN has credibility. What I have done is say it's not up to me to judge the level of fraud. That's up to the institutions.
But you disagreed with Peter Galbraith at the time, didn't you, sir?
Sorry?
You disagreed with Peter Galbraith at the time.
No, I did not. Much of what he said is simply untrue, but I said that's a footnote. I don't want to discuss it anymore. It's irrelevant.
What is relevant, sir, because he said there was voter fraud before everybody else. He's been vindicated now. Don't you owe him an apology at least?
I had no doubt from the first day that there had been fraud, but I could not, as he could, quantify it a few hours after the election had taken place. That's the difference between us. It's not my role, but it's a role of the institution that I have appointed to identify the level of fraud, and they have done so.
Now tell us a little bit about those power-sharing talks that took place before it was decided that there'd be a runoff on November the 7th, because we know that there wasn't much of an appetite for a runoff. What went on in those talks between Hamid Karzai and Dr. Abdullah?
I'm not aware of those talks. And that is precisely my point. What I have done is to see my role as protecting the constitution and the election process and the institutions established. It's up to the Afghans themselves to decide how to organize themselves. Now we'll have a second round, and they will then have to form the best possible government that they can.
Okay, there's 2 weeks to go. We've spoken about voter apathy. There wasn't a high turnout in August during that first round of elections. Winter is setting in, as we've mentioned. The Taliban stepped up attacks in August at the onset of elections. They will probably do the same now. You've got a lot on your plate. You've got a logistical and security nightmare, don't you?
On the logistic, practical side, I believe we're on track. We had meetings all day today. Most of this, what is needed is in place and been sent to the provinces. The security plan we're discussing, I believe that we will be able to do better than last time by drawing on some of the lessons we've learned. But let's be clear about this. This is not going to be a perfect runoff. This is a country in conflict, and we have to remember that. With regard to the turnout, it is normally in any country that the turnout in the second round is lower than in the first, but we have to do our best now to mobilize the Afghan voters to come to the polling stations. That is not going to be easy. They have never done it before, but we'll do our utmost.
It's interesting that you say that this is not going to be a perfect runoff. What happens if there are question marks over the legitimacy of the runoff in 2 weeks' time? What happens then?
I think we will have a runoff. First of all, I believe and I hope we'll have a dignified campaign that can lead us to fair results, and where also we will be able to draw on some of the lessons we have with regard to the level of fraud. We detected fraud this time, but I hope that the level of fraud, and I believe the level of fraud in the runoff on the 7th of November will be lower than it was this time.
Mr. Eide, do you have a message for the people of Afghanistan who may have lost the stomach, who may have lost the appetite for elections after this long saga?
Yes, I have a message, which is I respect those Afghans who went to the polling stations during the first elections. I admire the patience that they have demonstrated over the last 2 months, and I do appeal to them to go to the vote and bring this election process to an end.
Kai Eide, UN's Special Representative for Afghanistan, we thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Right, let's bring in our